The savanna stretched out vast and endless beneath the weight of a silent night, its wide shoulders carrying both life and death without ever pausing to choose between them. The tall grass swayed like thin dancers under the breath of the wind, and the stars pressed close, watching coldly from above. That night, the earth became both cradle and grave. Abeni, 8 months heavy with child, stumbled barefoot across this harsh expanse, cast out by her husband, rejected by her family and whispered against by her people. She had been made an exile when she should have been cherished most. Her face was drawn, her steps unsteady, her eyes glinting with both pain and shame. The moon bore witness when her time came. The pains tore into her body like unseen claws, hauling her down onto the dust. Alone, trembling, with no hand to hold and no word of comfort to steady her, she gave birth under the gaze of the stars. A baby boy entered the world that night, his cries piercing the dark as if demanding to know why he had been born into silence. But as his first breath began, his mother's final breath ended. Abeni's body went slack, her fight emptied into the soil. The child cried into the unfeeling wilderness. His wail was fragile, thin against the enormity of the night, but it was also stubborn, demanding that someone, somewhere, would hear. And someone did. Nia, a lone traveler and villager returning home from distant relatives, walked steady along a narrow footpath, a gourd of water balanced on her shoulder, her mind heavy with private thoughts. The wind that night carried nothing but the ordinary sighs of the land, until a sound broke that sadness. At first faint, like a trick of the ear, then louder, sharper, cutting through her bones. A cry, her heart lurched. It was not the sound of an animal. It was human, small, hopeless. A newborn's voice. She froze, the gourd trembling against her chest. She wanted to doubt what she had heard. But the cry came again, desperate and unrelenting. There was no mistake. The savanna itself seemed to be delivering the plea straight to her. With urgency, she turned off the path. Branches scraped her arms, shrubs pressed tight against her body as she forced her way through. Each step deepened her unease until the moon revealed before her a sight she would never forget. On the ground, the dust still wet, lay a woman. A palm rested faintly across her side, the posture strangely calm, as though peace had come, but only in death. Her belly was marked with the aftermath of birth, and beside her, wrapped loosely in simple cloth, a baby flailed and cried. Nia's gourd slipped from her shoulder and broke against the earth. For a long moment she stood paralyzed, her knees unsteady under the weight of the vision. Then, trembling, she lowered herself. Her fingers touched the mother's cheek, cold already, breathless forever. "Woman," she whispered, her voice carrying sorrow and apology. "You left too soon." With hands shaking but firm enough to choose, she lifted the child into her arms. Warmth radiated into her chest. His tiny body shivered. His fingers curled suddenly with surprising strength as they clasped her hand. That living grip pushed through her heart like fire. In that instant something lit inside her. A destiny she had never sought but could not deny. She had never borne children of her own, yet under the moon she understood. This cry was not only a sound, it was a summons. But doubt soon pressed in. What would she say to the village? Would she be seen as foolish, even cursed? Would the elders scorn her for taking what did not belong to her? Could she protect a motherless child alone? Yet her heart shouted over that storm. If no one else heard, I did. If no one else came, I did. This child will not die here. Carefully, she adjusted the cloth around the baby and covered his body with her shawl. With tears spilling silently, she made him a promise. She would not let him be alone. Then she began to hum. It was the lullaby her grandmother had once sung to soothe restless babies. A tune said to keep evil at a distance. Her voice blended with the wind until the boy's cries softened. His face settled, and he surrendered to the safety of her body, drifting into sleep. Nia raised her face to the star-filled heavens. For a fleeting moment she believed the departed woman was watching her, each star a witness glowing with approval. One life had ended, another had just begun, and fate had placed both into Nia's hands. She pulled the infant closer, breathed deeply, and rose. The path home would be long, but she was no longer merely a traveler returning to her fire and her family. She was now carrying a life entrusted to her by the night itself. The savanna no longer mocked with silence. The same wind that once scraped her skin now whispered like a witness beside her, honoring her newfound vow. Her steps felt heavy, but purposeful. She whispered, "This boy has someone to fight for him now." Without knowing it fully, she had already shifted the destiny of her people. And yet, deep within, another truth approached her heart. The baby sighed gently in her arms, his breath halting, his face soft. Each time her gaze fell on him, an unsettling recognition stirred like smoke. Though she tried to suppress it, the image of the mother's lifeless face burned relentlessly into her mind. The nose, the tired lips, the hair tangled by labor. Sweat ran down Nia's skin as she forced herself to recall, until the truth broke like a blade. This was no stranger. This dead woman was a Beanie, her sister-in-law, cast out by her own brother Kunda to wander until death took her. The child pressed against her chest was not just an orphan. He was her nephew, blood of her blood, child of the very brother whose pride had condemned his wife. Nia's knees buckled. Rage and remorse flooded her in equal measure. For a moment, she almost thought of leaving him, abandoning him as his father had. But when she looked at his innocent sleeping face, her heart surged. Through trembling lips, through silent tears, she gave her vow aloud to the night. If you refuse to be his father, then I will be a mother. Her voice cracked on the words, but the vow sealed itself into her soul. The choice that would change everything was made. The path lay long before, the dawn wind sweeping hints of earth and coming rain. Still clutching him, Nia prayed softly. Ancestors, give me strength so this boy will not be condemned for his father's sins. Let him grow with dignity, even if the world rejects him. The child stirred, opened his tiny eyes for the first time, and met her gaze as if understanding the promise being forged in the dark. His faint look filled her chest with a surge of strength far greater than her fear. This was no longer a burden to carry. It was her mission. At the horizon's edge, the sun was threatening to rise. Wrapping the boy closer in her shawl, Nia continued on her path. His small breaths warmed against her chest, and though her own heart was storming with fear, she walked steady. Because now, she was no longer just Nia the traveler. She was the protector of her dead sister's child. She was the defier of her brother's arrogance. She was the carrier of a new destiny. And with the sun already threatening the horizon, Nia resumed her walk. The boy slept peacefully, warmed by her body, but inside her heart, the storm still raged. She knew the worst was yet to come, for soon upon arriving at the village, she would have to face her brother's hard gaze, and in that confrontation, blood and honor would stand face to face. The sun was already rising on the horizon when Nia reached the outskirts of the village. The orange sky lit up the dusty road, and the hurried trot of a few goats reminded her that daily life was already beginning to stir. But inside her, nothing felt ordinary. Each step she took carried a moral weight, as if every stone in the path were an early judgment cast upon her. The baby, still wrapped in sweat-damp cloth, rested against her chest, breathing with the innocence of someone unaware of the rejection that awaited him. As she passed through the first yards, a few women fetching water stopped, surprised to see Nia carrying a newborn. Whispers began immediately, soft voices but sharp as blades. Look, it's the rejected woman's child. Another added, what does she think she's doing? Is she bringing a curse into the village? The murmurs multiplied, and Nia felt each word fall on her like invisible stones. Still, she kept her eyes steady, walking like someone carrying not just a child, but a banner of resistance. Soon the first men, seated in the shade of trees, noticed the scene. One said aloud, that boy should be given to his father. After all, it's his blood. Another replied coldly, or maybe it would have been better to leave him to fate. A child born of shame only brings disgrace. The debate grew, but none offered a hand to help, only hard stares, some laced with contempt, others with curiosity. It was as if they were all testing Nia's courage, and though her heart beat fast, she showed no sign of hesitation. When she crossed the central square, where women were pounding maize and large wooden mortar, the murmurs turned into a wave of reproach. The pounding stopped, and every eye turned to her. One of the older women murmured, "She brought home the child of the disgraced. That can only bring shadow." Another, more compassionate, said, "It's not the child's fault. She was just born." The neighbors were divided, but no hand reached out to touch the baby. It was as if he carried within him the mark of shame left by his mother's death and his father's rejection. Nia kept walking with purpose, even as the weight of judgment grew heavier around her. Her feet were swollen from the long walk, but her upright posture made it clear she had no intention of bending. She stopped in the middle of the square, held the child to her chest, and looked around, eyes locked in silence, waiting for her to hand the baby over or retreat under the weight of collective pressure. But her voice, though quiet, came out firm. "This boy will not be abandoned, not while I still have strength." No one responded immediately. A heavy silence fell over the square as if everyone had been struck by the unexpected power of her words. In that moment, a younger woman stepped forward and asked, "And if the father comes to claim him, will you hand him over?" The question was thrown like a challenge, but Nia didn't flinch. She clutched the baby even tighter and replied, "I carried him from the savannah to here. I cradled him when no one else would hear his cry. I won't leave him in the hands of someone who denied him before he was even born." The murmuring stopped for a moment, and a few people looked away, unable to face the strength that rose in her voice. With each step toward her own home, Nia realized that the villagers weren't just watching her. They were also reflecting on their own actions. Some, recalling the night a Benny was cast out, felt a stab of shame. They had watched in silence as a pregnant woman was humiliated without raising a voice to defend her. Now they saw her death reflected in the child breathing in Nia's arms. The weight of that omission hung heavy over them, but few would have the courage to admit it. When she reached her doorstep, Nia stopped once more. The sun was now burning high and sweat ran down her face, mixing with the tears that refused to stop. The baby stirred, opened his mouth, and let out a soft cry as if sensing the tension in the air. Nia rocked him gently, humming the same old songs her grandmother had taught her, and entered the house without asking anyone's permission. She closed the door behind her, fully aware that she had not just faced down her neighbors. She had declared a silent war on all the condemnation surrounding the child. The village fell quiet after she entered. But the whispers didn't stop. Many believed she had gone mad. Others, though unwilling to admit it, felt a quiet respect for her courage. But everyone knew that sooner or later Kunda would hear about the child's return, and he would come demanding answers. The tension was only beginning, and the weight of Nia's choice now echoed like a distant drum, announcing the inevitable confrontation. The sun had yet to reach its highest point when the news spread through the village. Melija had brought back the rejected woman's child. In no time, every corner buzzed with murmurs, the story spreading like wildfire through dry grass. It didn't take long to reach Kun's ears. He was returning from the fields, his steps heavy, and his chest puffed with pride. His expression darkened as he caught the whispers. "The baby lives." Nia brought him back in her arms. His wounded pride flared, and he strode forward like the world owed him reverence. Dot at his sister's door. Kunda pounded hard, making the worn wood tremble. His voice echoed down the dirt road. "Nia, open this door. I know what you've done." Inside, the baby cried, as if sensing the storm approaching. Nia took a deep breath, rocking the child with steady hands. She opened the door slowly, and found her brother standing outside, surrounded by onlookers. His eyes burned with rage, but also with a thinly veiled shame. "That child is mine," Kunda said bluntly. "You have no right to claim him. Hand him over. He carries my blood." The words came like sharp spears aimed at piercing Nia's dignity, but she didn't flinch. She held the baby tighter to her chest and answered firmly, "You killed his mother with your shame. You won't take the child just to parade him like a trophy. Blood doesn't make a father. A father protects. He doesn't abandon." A ripple ran through the crowd. Even the elders who rarely got involved in family disputes felt the weight of her words. Nia, with unwavering voice and steady gaze, was exposing a wound many pretended to forget. Kunda stepped forward, hand outstretched. But Nia stepped back, raising her arm in a protective gesture. The village fell into thick silence as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Kunda's new companion stepped out from among the women, watching with a half-smile full of venom. "Let him take the child," she said, like someone throwing oil on fire. "That boy is the mark of a Benny's shame. If he stays, hell bring disgrace to all of us." A few heads nodded in agreement, but others turned to water with discomfort at her boldness. The confrontation was no longer just between brother and sister, was now between truth and lies, courage and cowardice, love and pride. Fueled by the lover's words, Kunda lunged again, trying to snatch the boy from Nia's arms. But before he could touch him, she raised her voice so loud and commanding it sent a tremor through even the most distant listeners. "No, you will not take this child. Not while I am alive. You can shout. You can threaten me. You can try to humiliate me in front of everyone, but you won't make me hand over what you never had the heart to protect." Her words boomed like thunder. The men watching lowered their eyes. The women, some holding back tears, nodded silently. It was as if the whole village had been waiting for that moment. Someone finally standing up to Kunda's pride. The baby, as if sensing his aunt's moral victory, stopped crying and fell asleep in her arms. The contrast between the father's rage and the child's peace dealt a final blow to Kunda's image in the eyes of the community. Kunda stepped back, gripped by a mix of anger and helplessness. He tried to raise his voice once more, but realized the power was no longer his. His sister had laid bare his cruelty for all to see. He turned away, face burning with shame, and walked off in a hurry, carrying only the weight of the village's silent reproach. That day, the Ville's dusty square bore witness to more than just a family clash. It was the day truth lifted its head against pride. The day a woman faced down arrogance with the quiet strength of justice. And for the first time, the community so often silent in the face of injustice stood on the side of dignity. After the public confrontation between Nia and Kunda, the village didn't return to normal. The heavy silence that had lingered in the air gave way to hushed conversations, sidelong glances, and gossip that spread from mouth to mouth. And at the center of this new web of rumors was Safina Khan's new companion. She was young, beautiful, and knew how to wield words like poison. Drop by drop, her sharp tongue didn't need to shout. A whisper at just the right moment was enough to ignite the most fragile hearts. Safina began spreading her venom carefully. First, by the well, as the women filled their water pots with a tone of fiend compassion, she said, "Poor child. Born marked. His mother died of sorrow. Alone, in the savannah. Isn't that a sign of a curse?" The women glanced at each other, some uneasy, others intrigued, and before anyone could respond, she added, "A child born of suffering can only bring misfortune. You'll see." The words spread like smoke in the marketplace. They echoed from other lips. "He's the child of the curse." Among the men gathered in conversation circles, the rumors grew. "Maybe it's better to keep that boy away before something worse happens." Safina's poison kept multiplying, infecting weaker hearts with fear and suspicion. There was no proof, no signs that the baby brought harm. But prejudice is like dry straw. One spark is all it takes to catch fire. Inside her home, Nia felt the weight of that rejection. The neighbors no longer visited as they used to. Some crossed the street when they saw her approaching with the baby in her arms. The children who used to play at her doorstep were called away by their mothers, as if the little one carried some invisible disease. Every act of distancing was a fresh wound, but Nia remained steadfast, cradling the child while singing the old songs her grandmother had taught her. At night, when the baby cried, and the wind whistled through the cracks in the thatched walls, Nia knelt before a small oil lamp and prayed in silence. "May the cruelty of words not weigh upon this child. May his mother's memory cover him like a cloak, and may my strength be enough to protect him until he can stand on his own." With each prayer, the baby's cries seemed to soften, as if her words were stronger than any rumor. But Safina didn't stop. When she noticed that some still showed sympathy for the child, she changed her tone, pretending to be concerned. "Don't you see? That boy is dangerous because he bears the mark of abandonment. He'll grow up filled with hate. One day he'll bring ruin to us all." And so with her sharp words, she tried to turn compassion into fear, and fear into rejection. Despite the venom being spread, Nia refused to be defeated. On the contrary, which rumor only made her hold the baby tighter. She fed him, bathed him, rocked him to sleep with songs that spoke of dignity and resistance. When neighbors looked at her with disdain, she lifted her head and answered with silence. When someone muttered that the child was cursed, she simply smiled and kept walking. It was as if her calm was the most powerful answer to Safina's poison. The baby grew up surrounded by this silent war. On one side, the words that tried to cast him out. On the other, his aunt's steady care, who made it clear he wasn't a burden, but a legacy. Sometimes, watching the boys sleep peacefully, Nia would whisper, "They may reject you, but in my heart, you are my son, and always will be." And little by little, without realizing it, the quiet strength of this woman began to show. While Safina sowed fear, Nia sowed dignity. While the lover spoke of curses, the aunt showed true love. The village slowly began to see that no matter how loud Safina's poisonous tongue might be, Nia's unwavering kindness held a power that couldn't be silenced. Weeks went by, and the poison spread by Safina seemed to take root. The boy, still so small, was already burdened with the weight of the Ville's sharp tongues. Some refused to hold the child. Others pulled their children away when Nia approached with him in her arms. The women who once exchanged corn, water, or stories with Nia now offered only suspicious looks. It was as if the shadow of Abeni's death still hung over the baby, and many believed the cursed words of Kunda's new companion. But life in the village doesn't stop, and amid the mistrust, there came a day of assembly when everyone gathered to discuss matters of common interest. The elders were there, men and women whose words carried the weight of tradition. It was at this meeting that something unexpected happened. While some debated the harvest, and others the boundaries of the land, the baby strapped near Nia's back began to cry. The sound echoed through the gathering, cutting through the hum of voices. Some frowned, others looked annoyed, and a few whispered, "There he goes again." The rejected ones, child always causing trouble. That's when the eldest of the elders, Baba Seifu, slowly rose to his feet. His white beard told of many years lived, and his wooden cane struck the ground rhythmically with each step. All fell silent as he made his way toward Nia. She, fearing a public reprimand, held the baby tighter and lowered her gaze. But Baba Sefu reached out his wrinkled hands and said in a steady voice, "Bring me the child." Nia's heart pounded. For a moment she thought of refusing, but there was something in his eyes more than authority. There was compassion. Gently she untied the cloth and placed the baby in the Aylers's arms. The crowd watched in silence as if this gesture were more important than any decision about crops or land. Baba Sefu looked at the boy for a long time. The child stopped crying and opened his eyes, staring back at him with innocence. The elder smiled, and lifting the baby high above his head, declared in a strong voice, "Those born of pain can also blossom in honor." His words rolled through the assembly like thunder. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed for having believed the gossip. Others nodded slowly, recognizing the truth hidden in his words. The baby, once labeled a curse, had been blessed openly and proudly by the most respected elder in the village. And in that moment, the tide began to turn. Baba Sefu returned the child to Nia and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Raise him with courage. He is not a burden. He is a promise." That simple gesture cracked the wall of silence surrounding mother and child. A few women approached discreetly, offering dried fruits for Nia to take home. One young woman dared to touch the baby's hand, and he grasped her finger with his tiny ones, drawing a shy smile from her. It was as if that public blessing had broken the spell of prejudice, creating a small opening of acceptance amidst rejection. From afar, Safina watched the scene with burning eyes. The poison she had sworn seemed to weaken in the face of a single act of compassion. No matter how hard she tried to discredit the child, the word of an elder carried more weight than any rumor. And the village, which had been divided by whispers and judgment, began to see in that child not just the mark of shame, but the possibility of redemption. That night back home, Nia felt something different in the air. There were still harsh looks, still whispers, but they no longer crushed her. The baby slept peacefully, and she, for the first time in a long while, breathed deeply, feeling that she was no longer entirely alone. Baba's soft gesture had planted a seed, and even if it took time to bloom, she knew dignity had finally found room to grow. Time went on, and Baba Sifa's words still echoed in the village's memory. Those born of pain can also blossom in honor. The boy, though still small, had begun to be seen differently by some. It wasn't full acceptance yet, but the fear that Safina had sworn with her venomous tongue had started to fade. But for Kunda, every act of compassion toward the son he had rejected was a wound to his pride. He couldn't bear to see the child whom he claimed should have been forgotten slowly, earning glances of respect. Wounded pride is more dangerous than poison, and it was from that pride that his thirst for revenge was born. Kunda began lurking around his sister's house in silence. At night, he hid in the shadows, watching the child sleep in Nia's arms, and his heart burned. "That boy is my blood," he muttered through clenched teeth, "and I won't let her raise him like he's hers." But it wasn't love or duty that drove him. It was power, the need to prove that he still held control over what he had once cast aside. The village, which once praised his strength, now looked at him with growing suspicion. He couldn't bear the humiliation of watching his sister rise, while he sank lower. It was on a market morning that the tension finally exploded. Nia was walking through the square, the baby strapped to her back, buying cassava and maize when Kunda appeared in the middle of the crowd. Silence fell like a stone. He marched forward, voiced loud and commanding, "This child is mine. He cannot be kept from his father. Bring him to me now." All eyes turned to Nia, waiting for her response. Her heart pounded, but her voice came out clear and steady without a tremble. "A father is not the one who creates life, Kunda. A father is the one who protects it, and you've never protected this boy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded silently, others stepped back, shocked by her boldness. Consumed by rage, Kunda grabbed Nia's arm and tried to pull the baby away. The child began to cry, his wail echoing through the square like a scream for justice. Nia stood her ground, clutching Abeni's son to her chest with all her strength. She looked her brother in the eye right there in front of everyone and said, "You may have given him blood, but you gave him no love. You may have given him a name, but you gave him no honor. This boy is not your trophy. He is the life you abandoned." Her words struck like a blade. The entire square watched the confrontation, and for the first time, the crowd did not remain silent. A woman from the village shouted, "Leave the child with her. Kunda, he didn't care when Abeni suffered alone." Then a man added, "A man who rejects the mother has no right to call himself a father." The voices multiplied, and soon the square was filled with protests against him. The power Kunda believed he held crumbled before his eyes. Safina tried to intervene, but her voice was drowned out by the crowd. The people no longer listened to her. Dachempunda, red with anger and humiliation, released his sister's arm and stepped back. The baby still cried, but this time the sound didn't irritate, amplified the justice of the moment. It was as if the whole village had finally awakened from a sleep of complicity. Realizing that Kun's arrogance no longer had a place among them, Nia, breathless, held the child close to her chest. Her teary eyes didn't show fear but courage. She knew now that she was no longer alone. The community, which once whispered behind her back, now stood up in her defense. The silence of complicity had been broken. For the first time, Kunda was no longer seen as the strong man of the village, but as the betrayer of his own home. He left the square with his head down, dragging behind him the weight of shame. The murmurs that followed were no longer spoken in fear, but in contempt. The revenge he had attempted had turned against him. That day, justice didn't come through swords or raised fists, but through the collective strength of a village that finally chose a side. The boy, now calmed in Nia's arms, soon fell asleep, as if he knew that in that confrontation he had gained more than safety. He had gained the right to exist without carrying the weight of rejection alone. The years passed like the wind across the savannah, sometimes gentle, sometimes unforgiving. The boy whom Nia had named Jabari grew up under divided gazes. To Some, he was still the son of the rejected, a living reminder of Eni's shame and Kunda's arrogance. To others, especially those who had witnessed Nia's courage, was proof that dignity could take root even in the soil of sorrow. Nia, with calloused hands and an unshakable heart, dedicated her life to raising him not just as a nephew, but as a true son. From an early age, Jabari showed a different kind of strength. Not just the vitality of his body, but the serenity in his eyes. When other children insulted him, calling him cursed, fatherless child of shame, he didn't respond with shouting or fists. He stayed quiet, sometimes lowering his head, then simply moved on. This calmness confused those who expected bitterness or rage. And every time he came home with teary eyes, Nia would say, "You are not a burden, Jabari. You are a legacy. Don't let rotten words rot your heart." And he listened, storing those lessons like seeds for the future. In his teenage years, Jabari began working in the fields, helping neighbors harvest maize and sorghum. Many tested him, expecting laziness or disgrace, but the young man surprised them all. He worked harder than grown men, enduring the scorching sun without complaint. And when he was paid in small sacks of grain, he always gave a portion to Nia, saying, "This is the fruit of the dignity you taught me." Those words moved his aunt deeply. She saw in the boy the reflection of the mother who was lost. Slowly, even some of those who had once scorned him began to change. A neighbor who once called him cursed began asking for his help repairing fences. A woman who used to cross the street to avoid Nia's house once offered Jabari cool water after a long day's work. These weren't grand gestures, but they were signs that the boy's kindness was beginning to quiet the malicious tongues where Safina had once sown fear. Jabari was now reaping respect through simple, honest actions. But the path was not easy. Many nights under the stillness of the village, Jabari wondered about his father. Why had he been rejected? Why had his mother died alone? Sensing these questions, Nia would sit beside him and tell him stories about Abeni, her kindness, her quiet courage, and how she never stopped believing that her son would be her greatest gift, even in the midst of pain. These stories stirred a different kind of pride in Jabarino. The pride of Kun's blood, but of Abeni's dignity. Nia's simple faith also shaped him. Before bed, she taught him to give thanks for the little they had. "It's not wealth that gives a man worth, Jabari," she'd say. "It's how he treats others." Those words engraved themselves in his heart, and he grew up learning to be strong in the face of injustice, and generous even in the face of ingratitude. One day, a group of older boys tried to provoke him, mocking that he'd never have a future because he carried his father's shadow. But Jabari replied calmly, "His shadow can't put out my mother's light." The phrase spread through the village, and many repeated it in secret like a proverb. In that moment, even the doubters began to see that the boy hadn't inherited his father's arrogance, but his mother's dignity. Over time, Jabari was no longer just the son of the rejected. He became the respected young man people knew they could count on. The hard stares softened into recognition, and the voice that once spread rumors for Phoenix found fewer and fewer ears to poison. The boy of the savannah, born in rejection, was growing up, showing that kindness has more power than pride. And beside him, Nia aged in peace, knowing that the choice she made on that night of tears and solitude had not been in vain. The boy once rejected was becoming a man of honor, and that was the most powerful answer to all who had ever doubted. Time, which spares no one, began to take its toll on Kunda. The man who once walked with his chest puffed, outlawed of land and words that once carried the weight of law in the village, no longer held the same strength. His pride, however, remained untouched, and it was that very pride that led him to ruin. For years he'd believed that his new companion, Safina, was proof of his triumph over the rejected Abeni. But the beauty and cunning that once captivated him soon proved fragile in the face of life's harsh reality. The lands he had inherited from his parents, long a source of pride and conflict, began to dry up. Neglect in the fields combined with poor choices led to smaller and smaller harvests each year. Instead of working hard like the other men, Kunda spent his time bickering and drinking, feeding his ego while his wealth slipped through his fingers. Used to basking in the glow of men with means began to grow restless. The whispers that once praised her beauty now commented on her coldness. The harshest blow came when a plague struck the maize crops. Many suffered, but while others managed to recover, Kunda had no real friends to help him back up. For years, he had mocked others' weakness, ignored cries for help, and humiliated his neighbors. Now when he reached out, no hands met his. He never cared for us, the men muttered in the village square. Why should we care now? Safina, seeing the last flicker of prosperity die out, didn't take long to abandon him. One quiet morning, she left without a word, taking with her the last few valuables they had. She didn't look back. When Kunda woke and found the house empty, he tasted solitude for the first time. He tried to find her, tried to promise riches he no longer had, but she was gone without regret, leaving him with nothing but the ashes of his pride. The village watched his fall with a mix of astonishment and a sense of justice. To many, it was simply life doing what life always does. The man who had rejected, humiliated, and abandoned now knew abandonment himself. His name, once spoken with respect, had become synonymous with disgrace. Don't be like Kunda, the elders warned the children. The saying spread through the village like a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Jabari continued to grow under Nia's care, proving each day that true inheritance isn't in blood, but in dignity. The comparison was inevitable, while the father sank in shame. The son, born of rejection, rose in honor. The villagers watched this contrast and understood. Destiny isn't guided by power, but by choices. Kunda, now alone, wandered the village like a shadow. His clothes were worn, his steps slow, and his eyes, once burning with pride, held only the sorrow of someone who had lost everything. Some still remembered the woman who died alone in the savannah, cast out by him, and whispered, "It's the weight of a Beni's soul, collecting its debt." No one helped him. Each day he sank deeper into his own bitterness. The punishment of the traitor did not come by human hands, but through the slow erosion of life itself. He lost his land, his wealth, and the woman he had chosen. But worst of all, he lost their respect of the village. All that remained was to watch from afar as the son he rejected grew not as the heir to his pride, but as a living witness to his downfall, and so fate fulfilled itself before everyone's eyes. The arrogant was reduced to nothing, while the rejected, born of pain, became a symbol of hope. Kun's punishment was not just material but spiritual, and in the mouths of the people. His story lived on as proof that no one escapes the justice of time. The years had flowed like rivers that never turn back. Jabari, the boy born in the desert of rejection, was no longer a child. Time had shaped him into a strong young man with a steady gaze and hands hardened by honest labor. The village which once saw him as a burden now saw him as a man. Many came to him for help, carrying heavy sacks, mending fences, guiding the younger ones in the fields. But it wasn't just his strength that impressed. It was his presence. Always humble, always willing, always with a calm word that echoed the heart of his mother. As Jabari rose in honor, Kunda sank deeper into shadow. His lands were no longer his loss to debt and neglect. The woman he had chosen was long gone, never looking back. His old companions, those who once feasted with him in times of plenty, crossed the road to avoid his gaze. He had become a man alone, marked by shame. His hair had turned gray, his body stooped, and his voice, once commanding, was now a bitter whisper. Then came a morning of heavy sun, and a moment the village would never forget. Kunda, trying to lift a bundle of firewood larger than his strength could bear, collapsed onto the dry ground. For minutes he lay there, struggling to rise while passers-by watched in silence. No one stepped forward. Some turned their faces. Others remembered the humiliations he had sworn. The traitor was now tasting the same indifference he had once offered the woman he cast out. It was Jabari who broke the silence. Upon seeing the man fallen, he didn't move right away. His heart was heavy. This was his father, but also the man who had never given him love, who had denied even his existence. The pain of his mother's memory still lived in him like a scar. And yet along with that pain, Nia's words echoed in his soul. "You are not a burden. You are a legacy." And your legacy is not rejection, is dignity. Moved by those words, Jabari took a deep breath, stepped forward, and offered his hand. Kunda looked up, eyes weary, and saw the son he had rejected. For a moment, the shame was so deep that he wanted to refuse the help, but his body no longer allowed pride. He took Jabar's hand and the young man lifted him from the ground as if raising a burden far too heavy for one man alone. The entire square watched in silence. No one spoke, but everyone felt the weight of that gesture. Jabari said nothing of reproach, nothing of resentment. He simply helped his father steady himself, picked up the fallen firewood, and carried it alone to the shade of a tree. There, he set it down and said calmly, "The mother you rejected taught me dignity. I didn't learn to hate you. I learned to be greater than rejection." Then he walked away, leaving Kunda sitting there, eyes filled with tears for the first time in many years. The village murmured quietly. He didn't inherit his father's heart, but his mother's. These words passed from mouth to mouth, becoming almost a proverb. The boy once rejected had given his father what he had never received: compassion. It was the triumph of spirit over bitterness, of kindness over arrogance. From that day on, Jabari's image changed completely. He was no longer just a boy saved by his aunt or the hard-working youth of the fields. He had become a living symbol that dignity outlives even the deepest contempt. The elders spoke of him in their stories. The young looked up to him. Recognition didn't come in the form of applause or celebration, but in the respectful silence that filled the village, and Kunda, sitting beneath the tree's shade, finally understood too late what he had lost. The son he had rejected had shown him a greatness he himself had never possessed. In that silence, he was judged not by the strength of the shouts he once wielded, but by the quiet mercy of a hand he didn't deserve but received. Fate had rendered its verdict. Rejection breeds ruin, but dignity, once rooted, grows into honor that no one can erase. The story of Abeni, Nia, Jabari, and Kunda became part of the Ville's nightly conversations, passed down from generation to generation as both a warning and a source of hope. No one forgot the painful beginning when a pregnant woman was cast out of her own home by the husband who chose another over her. The image of Abeni walking alone through the savannah, carrying notonly her unborn child, but the weight of rejection was etched into the village's collective memory like a scar. Her lonely death, as her baby's cries echoed in the wind, stood as a portrait of human injustice. But life, woven also by invisible threads of justice, did not let that pain be in vain. Nia, the sister who defied her own blood to take in the rejected child, rose as the true pillar of the story. Her courage to face the village, endure scornful looks, and even challenge her brother publicly was what kept the flame of dignity alive. She had no riches, no titles, but possessed something stronger: the unshakable belief that a child should never be punished for the sins of adults, and it was this conviction that gave her the strength to endure rumors, venom, and threats. Always steadfast, always with her heart focused on the life she carried in her arms. The boy, born of death and banishment, Jabari became living proof that rejection is not a final sentence. He grew up under his aunt's lullabies, under the blessings of an elder who recognized him before all, and under the heavy silence of a community that little by little learned to see in him something greater than the pain of his origins. With every act of kindness, every calm word, he showed that his soul had not inherited his father's pride, but his mother's greatness. His growth was slow, marked by trials, but also by small victories, and each of those victories felt like an exposed wound in Kun's arrogance. Kunda in turn watched his life stripped away, everything he had once worn as armor. He lost his land, lost his wealth, lost the woman he had chosen over Abeni, and worst of all, lost the respect of the community. His name, once spoken with fear, became a synonym for betrayal and ingratitude. It was life's justice, which needs no court to be served. The man who had scorned his wife and denied his son ended up being rejected by fate itself. His punishment didn't come in sudden blows, but in slow agony, day after day watching his son rise in honor as he himself faded into a shadow of what he once was. Jabari's final gesture, offering his hand to his fallen father, was the moment that sealed everyone's fate. The entire village bore witness to that scene and understood that Abeni's death had not been in vain. In the quiet strength of his compassion, the young man showed that the dignity he inherited from his mother was stronger than the resentment he could have inherited from his father. He didn't need to shout or seek revenge. He simply extended his hand, and in doing so humbled his father more than any words ever could, because Kunda's true defeat was realizing that the son he had rejected had become greater than he had ever been. Thus, Abeni's memory did not fade. She never saw her son grow, but her life lived on through him. Every step Jabari took, every word spoken by N, every look of recognition from the villagers was a testimony that her dignity had triumphed bowed around evening fires. When the elders gathered to teach the young, someone would always say, "Rejection can kill, but it can also give birth to courage and love." And they would remember that child born in the savannah carried the strength of the woman the world cast aside. In the end, the story became more than a tale of sorrow. It became a symbol of justice. It showed that arrogance and betrayal lead to ruin, but compassion and loyalty can raise even the most fragile soul. It showed that blood alone doesn't define fatherhood, that true legacy is found in silent love. And above all, it showed that even when life strips everything away, it is still possible to leave behind something far greater than wealth. The dignity that passes on like an invisible root, nourishing future generations. And so in the heart of the village, the memory echoed on a Benny left too soon. But her life did not end in the dust of the savannah. Her story became the destiny of many, teaching that rejected love can bloom into honor, and that true victory doesn't belong to those who shout the loudest, but to those who quietly carry the courage to protect what is right. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our